My name is Katekani Paloi. I am the CEO and co-founder of a small and medium enterprise consultancy called the Sparkup Company. We're a small and medium enterprise ourselves, but we consult with small and medium enterprises. And what we do with them is we help them basically figure out how they can validate their commercial models and then try plug them into opportunities to scale up their businesses. We assist with putting together the commercial strategy of these SMMEs, make sure that they've got a clear go-to-market plan, have a clear distribution plan, pricing strategy, and all those sorts of things to make sure that we really give them the best opportunity to try and win in the market that they're trying to go after. Now, the primary objective behind this particular workshop was helping SMMEs craft their brand strategy. Now, the key objective with this particular workshop was to make sure that SMME owners understand who their target customer is and make sure that they built a product or a service offering that really meets the needs of their customers and make sure that they've got a brand in place that really resonates with that customer. The first part of this workshop was about finding your prime prospect. Now, I'm sure you guys have heard about your potential consumer set or your target market, right? Essentially, this is now saying very broadly, your target market is young men and women that are aged 23 to 35. They are working professionals. They live in and around the Gauteng area. That would be defining your target market, and it gives you that broad set of consumers that you could potentially go after. You don't really want to be talking to them in general when you're still starting out because there's a lot of noise out there, and if you're not clear about who your brand is supposed to be speaking to, your communication is not going to be clear and you're also not going to be putting it in the right places. So what you want to do is you want to take that potential target set and really hone it and whittle it down to identify a prime prospect. Now, a prime prospect goes into a lot more detail around if you could identify the perfect customer for your product, who would they be? What do they look like? Where are they hanging out? What do they do on a Friday afternoon after work? Get as specific as you possibly can to hone it down to maybe 100 or even 1,000 people, even though your total potential market is 1 million people, because it's a lot easier when you're still starting out to speak to 100 people versus 1,000 or 100,000 or 1 million. This is an exercise that we'd even do at some of the large organizations that I was working at where we've got hundreds of millions of rands worth of budget, but just as a starting point to make sure that our marketing activities were relevant and really spoke to the right customer, this is where we'd start our thinking, make sure that our communication and our messaging really speaks to that customer. And then it becomes easier for them to almost become like an evangelist for the brand and then do some of the work for you from a brand building point of view. So how do you go about finding your prime prospect, you might ask? Well, for me, I like to look at 3 principles that I'd suggest you guys use as a starting point. The first one is starting with why, right? Be very clear about why your product exists, right? Why is Apple computers? Why is BMW? Sheer driving pleasure. That speaks to a person who enjoys driving, and so they are much more likely to engage with that product versus, say, a vehicle manufacturer that's speaking about comfort and class and elegance, that other guy with the star, although they've been making really nice cars lately. Yeah, so always start with why. Once you've figured out your why, you want to do a little bit of research into the principles of Maya. Maya, the person like the singer? No, not that Maya. We're talking Maya as an M-A-Y-A. Most advanced, yet acceptable. Essentially what this says is, great, you've got some sort of newfangled innovation that's going to revolutionize the entire world, but is it going to make sense to your potential consumer? And you need to make sure that you're always thinking about that when you are trying to put out any sort of product or service out there. Make sure that it's something that speaks to and resonates with your target audience, in particular, your prime prospect. The third and last principle that I want to talk to you about is called the principle or the law of diffusion of innovation. This law essentially kind of maps out how innovation or new products and services find their way into market and get to a point where the mass market is using them. Okay, so that first principle, start with why. I'm not going to go into too much detail around this, but check out this talk by Simon Sinek. It's a TED talk. He did it about 12 years ago. It's about 18 minutes long on YouTube. The footage is hella grainy, but I promise you that is probably going to be the best 18 minutes you can spend as a small business owner. So definitely check out that principle on YouTube, where essentially he talks about the golden circle, where he outlines these three key components: the why, the how, and the what. And what he says is that most organizations, most people tend to start with the what because they are trying to sell you something. So they will come along and tell you, listen, buy this cup, it's made out of ceramic, it's really awesome, it's amazing. And that's really where they'll stop their communication to you as a customer. So it starts and ends with the product that they are trying to sell you. Whereas a really great organization will sell you the why. Yeah, so instead of saying this is an amazing cup that's made out of ceramic and it's only 20 Rand, what you'd want to think about is starting with the why. You love tea, right? But also, as most tea drinkers do, you probably make that cup of tea and then get distracted by something and you'll wander off and you'll come back and 30 minutes later your tea is cold and you have to warm it up in the microwave and it doesn't taste the same, and so you forget about it again, and then you rinse and repeat the cycle the entire day. But that's what happens with a normal teacup. I don't want to sell you a normal teacup. What if you could buy a teacup that keeps your tea piping hot for up to 45 minutes? There's my why, right? You're a tea drinker, you love tea, you hate the idea of cold tea, so you want to have your tea stay as hot as possible for as long as possible. Guys, please don't drink hot tea. You'll get like throat cancer and stuff. Anyway, and then only from there, once you've communicated the why, once you've got something that resonates with your customer, then you go into the how, right? The how is, we've come up with this amazing new technology where we coat our teacups with this like spray that maintains thermodynamic heat. And if you look at the resistance of the geometry of gravity and stuff, don't call me for consults on like science and stuff. Anyway, this cup is going to keep your tea warmer for longer. That's your how. Started with the why, now you're at the how. Then you get to the what. This is the teacup. Buy this amazing teacup. It's going to do all these things that we know you wanted to do, and it only costs you 45 Rand 99. Ta-da! Start with why. Maya. Most advanced yet acceptable. That's what Maya stands for. And essentially what it says is, when you are coming up with some sort of product or service that you want to take to market, think about what is the most advanced version of this thing that I can make that is still acceptable to my customer. A prime example of this is if you look at artificial intelligence and where it's kind of gone over the past couple of years. If you go back and you look at robots 15, 20 years ago, you will see stuff that's like super high tech, all of the wiring is out, and it's like, the future, Terminator, I'm back, bitches, and stuff. Call me, consult, what? Yeah. But if you look at artificial intelligence today, if you look at what the humanoids and cyborgs and robots of today look like, they are putting more and more human features into those robots, right? They've got hands, they stand on two legs, they walk and talk like us, sort of. They are putting silicone bodies and silicone faces on them that look really human. And the idea there is to say, guys, we figured out the most advanced bit. We've got quite a far way down the path in terms of figuring out how this robot needs to look and feel and how it needs to work. We figured out some of the artificial intelligence in such a way that this thing can now start to be useful to society. Now we need to start putting the yet acceptable component to these things, which is why you're seeing more human faces on robots, which is why your voice and sound assistants have names like Siri and Alexa. These are human names, why they've got the voices that sound like people, as opposed to what used to exist 20 years ago, which was like a really animatronic sort of I'm going to eat your children while you're sleeping type thing. That no more robot. That was a really bad impression. You guys should hear my Scottish impression. My Scottish impression slaps. But you need to catch the next workshop in order to hear that. But anyway, so essentially what I'm trying to get at is when you are coming up with some sort of product or service, and it's innovative and it's new and it's really going to make the lives of your customers and consumers better, think about your consumer, right? So yeah, great, it's advanced and it's sophisticated and it's fantastic, but does it make sense to them? Does it look familiar? Does it have a sense of nostalgia to them? And make sure that you try and build and bake that into whatever product or service you're taking to market, because it makes it that much easier for you to gain acceptance. All right, law of diffusion of innovation. Again, Simon Sinek explains this way better than I could on that TED Talk. So that TED Talk is like a 2-for-1. Guys, go watch that TED Talk. Simon Sinek, Start With Why. It's on YouTube. It's free. 18 minutes of your life. It's going to... and then blow your mind again. Because law of diffusion of innovation. And essentially what the law of diffusion of innovation states is that if you were to take your entire potential consumer set and plot them on a curve, right? They would fall into certain categories. You would get the innovators, you'd get the early adopters, you'd get your early majority, late majority, and then you'd get your laggards at the end. And there's this really nice bell curve that can be drawn. You guys remember bell curves from like varsity or high school where they graded us on bell curves and you didn't pass because you weren't on the curve. Okay, Mr. Van Schoor, whatever. Ek dink my Afrikaans praat is baie nie lelik nie. Dis lekker. Soos 'n cracker. Essentially, if you look at this bell curve, you will have your innovators who make up like about 2.5% of your market, and then you've got your early adopters who make up another like 13-14% of your market, and then you've got your early majority, late majority, so the majority of the market who's around 68 to 70% of your market, then the laggards. Who you want to be talking to are your innovators and your early adopters. Remember I said to you guys that it's a lot easier to talk to 100 people than it is to talk to 1 million, right? If you are able to hone down on who your prime prospect is, and you can figure out who are the 100 or 1,000 people that everyone else is looking at when it comes to innovation. And this speaks to individual consumers, and it speaks to organizations if you're a B2B business. There are certain businesses that are leaders in the market and certain others that are followers. If you are able to get into a position where you are very clearly honing in on the people that everyone else is looking at to set the pace, and you can influence those guys, man, you're going to be good. You're going to be golden. So bear this in mind when you are trying to identify your prime prospect, to say, okay, who in this sea of millions of potential customers that are going to turn me into a billionaire do I have a direct relationship with? Who here can I pick up a call and someone else can pick up a call, and then maybe 2 or 3 calls later I am talking to a potential influencer, right? So not just social, Instagram, TikTok, our influencers, but people that can make influential decisions, and leverage that, right? Once you've had that interaction, once you've got them to buy in, leverage the fuck out of that, right? Post it on your social media, write blog posts about it, do videos like I'm doing now. This is not to try and sell you services, call me. Anyway, so if once you've got that, leverage that engagement, leverage that interaction, because that's the sort of thing that can then get you the attention of the guys that are now sitting later on this bell curve of innovation, your early and late, your early majority and your late majority, and then eventually your laggard. So leverage those sorts of things, and be really strategic about which people you are choosing to spend your time talking to in the initial stages. Next up, we want to talk about creating a brand brief. Now, there's a lot of stuff online about people sort of helping you figure out how to put together your logo and your branding, etc. But a lot of it is more graphic designers walking you through the creative process. What I wanted to do with this was to say, okay, cool, what's the step before that? What do you as a client need to tell that graphic designer in order to effectively come up with branding materials for you? So the first thing that you want to think about is your brand persona. Now, what is brand persona? Brand persona, if I could like summarize it, I would say, imagine you were sitting down face to face having a conversation with your brand. Yo, brand, what's up, brand owner? How you doing? I'm great. Lovely. Buy me. Nga. Anyway, imagine you could sit down face to face and have a conversation with your brand. What would that brand sound like? What would their tone of voice be like? What sort of mannerisms would they have? What would their personality feel like? Would they be like warm and welcoming like me? Or would they be like doctor, sterile, like factual? I don't want to say like accountants because that's like played out. Also, accountants are great. Some of my best friends are accountants. That sounds like something a racist person would say. Anyway, is it possible to be racist against accountants? I hope not, because I'm not. I think accountants are great. I love accountants. You guys are great. Winners. Yeah, so if you could sit down and have a conversation with your brand, like what sort of vibe would you get off of that brand, right? Take all of that, note that down. And guys, bear in mind that here you are trying to think from the perspective of your potential customer, right? To say, what sort of brand do they want to interact with? And write down all of these things that you can think about around your brand, because it's really going to help your designer hone in on what that brand needs to look and feel like. Now, if you're doing it yourself, again, write it down as if you're going to brief a designer. Do the work of putting together your brand via like a Canva or something, and I'll tell you what that product was when they start sponsoring my videos. But anyway, I'm kidding, Canva. If you're briefing someone or if you're doing it yourself, like if you're doing it yourself, put yourself in that mindset of I am going to brief this to someone. Then you do the work, and then when you're done, come back and look at it from the perspective of a client and make sure that you are assessing yourself properly. Next up, we want to talk about your brand look and feel, right? So like, what do you want your brand to look like? What sort of feelings do you want your customers to feel when they look at your brand? Do you want it to remind them of grandma? Do you want it to give them a sense of nostalgia? Do you want it to feel ultra modern and retro? Do you want them to feel like, man, this is like my friend's brand. This brand is like my homie. What sort of feeling do you want to give your customers with your brand? Make sure that you include examples of brands that you like, be it logos that you like, fonts that you like, colors that you like, aesthetics that you like, pictures that you like. Give your artist as much reference images as you possibly can, but also making sure that you've edited it down so that it's cohesive, unless you're going for like an eclectic brand vibes. Make sure that it's edited and it makes sense. But again, also don't be afraid of giving your designer something and then being open to feedback that they give you in order to edit that down. Make it a collaborative process, because that's typically where you get the best results, where you're able to collaborate with your designer and make sure that you're getting the right end product that you are looking for. And also make sure that in putting all this stuff together, you try and put it into some sort of mood board. So you can give your designer a written brief that speaks to all the brand persona stuff and all your objectives, but also give them a mood board of sorts that tells them visually, this is what I want my brand to look and feel like. Now, a tip that I recommend using here, I'm sure you guys have seen it everywhere, is Pinterest. Pinterest, I think, is amazing when it comes to visualizing your thoughts. Create a Pinterest board for them. If you're like an advanced user, put things into different categories and just use that as a process to go back and forth and collaborate with your designer to hone in on the look and feel that you want them to deliver for your brand. Next up, we're talking about crafting your CTAs, or your calls to action, right? Now, call to action is basically to say, guys, And this is something you need to make sure you're including on all of the communication and all of your materials that you've got out there from a marketing point of view, especially while you're still starting, right? Because it's all well and good for you to run a digital campaign and you spend like 100,000 Rand on Google AdWords, or even 10,000 Rand, or even 1,000 Rand, even 100 Rand. Don't know what 100 Rand will give you because I'm not like a digital advertising expert. But anyway, however much money you spend, it's kind of pointless if you spend the money and you've got your logo and your branding and it's all great, but your customer doesn't know what to do with that information. It's like, okay, great. I see this thing that you're putting out in front of me, but what now? Right? So make sure that you've got a call to action there that is clear, it is simple, and it gives the customer some sort of impetus to say, okay, cool, so you want me to click here. Okay, cool, you want me to sign up. Cool, you want me to register for a workshop. I personally want you to call me for a consultation. Like, you do the DMs, whatever, do Dalla what you must do, what you got to do. Yeah, make sure you've got a call to action that speaks to your customer and it gives them some sort of action to take. They've given you the 30 seconds or a minute to interact with and watch your content. Give them a clear action that they can then take to further unlock whatever value it is that you're promising to them. And then last of all, we're going into assessing the end product, right? So you've done the work, you've put together the brief, and you know what the strategy is. Your designer has gone and done some really amazing work for you, and they're like, ta-da! You now need to assess this end product and make sure that it actually works and it's going to deliver the objectives that you set out to in actually going on a branding exercise. Now, in here, for me, this is me. There's 3 key principles that you need to bear in mind. Principle number 1. Always go back to your brief. Has your brief been met? Have your objectives been met? Has the designer delivered on what you briefed them? There was a reason you wrote that brief. You put a lot of time and effort and thinking into it. Make sure that at the very least the design that has been delivered to you actually delivers on that brief, if not exceeds it. The second thing that I recommend is, guys, build in public. If you've got people that you know, that you trust, send them the end product. Send it without context. Just be like, hey, what do you think of this brand? What do you think this brand does? What do you think it's for? Would you trust this brand? Would you buy this product? Would you subscribe to the service? And if they say yes, okay, where's the money? Where is the money? Here, I want the money. I want the money now. Anyway, guys, the economy is tough. We are new. Like hard. It's rough, bro. Get feedback from people that you think fit the mold of the prime prospect and see what their perspective is. And with that feedback, brings me to point number 3. Don't be afraid to iterate, right? Don't be afraid to look at the design, take in all the feedback, play around with a couple of different versions based on the feedback, and from there make the best decision. Now, please, graphic designers, don't kill me, because I know what it means to come up with a concept and then illustrate it, and it's work. It's a fuck ton of work. It's like editing. Jesus fucking Christ, it's work, bro. It's work. Oh my god, it's work. Anyway, this doesn't mean go back to your designer with 10 million reverts, right? You've got your design, print it out, take a piece of paper, pen, whatever, and like make sketches on it and come up with like 5 or 6 different iterations and see which one you like the most. Think about your feedback and then go back to your designer and say, listen, bro, I love what you did. I think it's amazing. You nailed the brief, bro. You took like one of those 9-inch nails and a hammer and you went, bah! You got it, but there was just like a little bit of that nail hanging out, bro, and we need to drive it home now, and I think this is how we do it. Okay, and you give them constructive feedback based on the feedback that you've had based on the one or two iterations that you've come up with. And again, collaborative process, work with them, understand where they were coming from with the perspective, share the perspective that you got in terms of feedback, and like don't exaggerate the feedback just to get them to do things how you want it. Give them like the open and honest feedback and let them go back and rework it and come back to you with the best final version of that product. Now, this is the last thing that I covered in the workshop, and it basically is like a nice little cheat sheet that we used at one of these large FM fast moving consumer goods companies that I spent 3 of my 12 odd years in corporate in. 10, 12, 12. I've been, wow, 12. Jesus, 12 years in corporate, bro. I'm old. I'm not going to say the name of the company. You guys can go check out my LinkedIn profile if you want to see. But essentially we had like this cheat sheet that we used where we like used these 5 principles, right, to assess whether or not an idea was great or not. And you can use the same thing to pretty much assess any form of communication, right? And you can look at your branding and assess based on these 5 principles. The first principle, is it disruptive? Does it stick out like a sore thumb? Make sure that your branding is disruptive. We live in a hell of a noisy world, especially from a brand pollution point of view, and it's only getting worse. So make sure that it's disruptive. The second is it clear, to the point? Pointing finger, point. But like, is it clear? Does it get to the point? The third principle, is it recognizable? I don't care where you are in the world. You can go anywhere in the world. You will recognize someone doing this, right? Is it recognizable? Think about your brand. Is it recognizable when you look at it? The fourth finger has to do with commitment, because this is that finger, commitment, right? Does it overcome purchase barriers, right? So does it overcome any challenges or barriers that your customer has in their mind when they're like, do I really want to commit to this purchase? Does it overcome that? And the last one, is it simple? Guys, make sure that your stuff is simple. Don't complicate it. Like, look at some of the most recognizable brands in the world. Simple, straightforward, clean, to the point. And historically, if you look at them, their logos and their brand identities were like these ultra detailed illustrations, but they simplified, and that's how they managed to become memorable and grow and scale, etc. One other one that I want to include just as a bonus tip.